Hello, everyone. Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to our annual Martin Luther King Jr. and Black History Month celebration. My name is Diane Forbes-Berthoud. I have the pleasure of serving as the Chief Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Officer and Vice President. And our office sponsors this great event with the President as well as OCPA and other great partners. I am here to extend apologies from President Gerald, who had to be in Annapolis today in legislative session. So on his behalf, I welcome Dr. Roger Ward to give remarks to welcome us. Dr. Ward.
Sawubona. In the Zulu language, this greeting means, I see you. It is more than just a hello. It is an acknowledgement of one another's presence, humanity, and worth. It reflects the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which teaches that I am because we are. When I say Sawubona to you, I'm not just recognizing that you are here in this space. I'm affirming your value, your dignity, and your place in this shared moment. In the spirit of Ubuntu, I invite you to respond with Yebo Sawubona. Yebo Sawubona, which means, yes, I see you. So let's try that together. I'll say Sawubona, and you will say Yebo Sawubona. Sawubona. Yebo Sawubona. Sawubona. Yebo Sawubona. Thank you. In this exchange, we're reminded that our humanity is deeply connected to the way we see and acknowledge one another. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to this same truth when he said, whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. This, he said, is the interrelated structure of reality. Today, as we gather to honor the life and legacy of Dr. King, we are called not only to remember his words, but to live them, to see one another fully, to stand for justice, and to recognize that our collective well-being is intertwined. On behalf of President Bruce Gerald and UMB's leadership, it is a privilege to welcome you to the University of Maryland, Baltimore's annual celebration of Black History Month and the enduring legacy of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. At UMB, we are deeply committed to advancing equity, justice, and opportunity, principles that Dr. King championed throughout his life. His call to action was not just about dreaming of a better future, but to actively shape it. Today, we gather to reflect, to celebrate, and to reaffirm our responsibility to build the kind of inclusive and just community that he envisioned. Our core values challenge us to think critically about our own roles in this ongoing work. How do we, as individuals, contribute to a more equitable and just society? How do we, as an institution, use our collective power to drive meaningful change? Black History Month is not just about looking back at progress. It is about recommitting ourselves to the hard but important work that still lies ahead. This afternoon, we'll hear from thought leaders and artists who challenge us, inspire us, and remind us why this work matters. I want to extend my congratulations to our award winners who exemplify the values of diversity, leadership, and advocacy. Your contributions make UMB and our broader community stronger. I want to also express my gratitude to everyone who made this event possible, the organizers, the volunteers, and to each of you for being here today. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce an incredible music talent, Makai Guest, and the Makai Guestet. Born and raised in Baltimore, in East Baltimore, I have to say East Baltimore because I know that matters in Baltimore. Makai has dedicated his life to music, studying a wide range of genres and performing both nationally and internationally. Today, he will lead us in a song that is often called the Black National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. You have the lyrics, so I encourage you to raise your voices and sing along. Makai.
Please stand. Lift every voice and sing. Thank you so much, Makai Guestet. Thank you, Dr. Ward, for those welcoming remarks. I'm now pleased to introduce our keynote speaker. Today's keynote speaker is a dear friend and one of the most brilliant people that I know. Dr. Darrick Hamilton will speak with us today about fulfilling Dr. King's legacy from civil rights to economic rights, causes, consequences, and remedies to fulfill economic and racial justice. In his 1963 I Have a Dream speech, Dr. Martin Luther King said, "We have come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Now is the time to make real change the promises of democracy. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy. Now is the time to rise from the dark and desolate valley of segregation to the sunlit path of racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial justice to the solid rock of brotherhood and sisterhood. Now is the time to make justice a reality for all. At UMB, we continue this commitment, as Dr. Ward said on behalf of Dr. Gerald, and these core values that we have include equity and justice. We continue to act decisively and ethically to improve the human condition and address the pressing, intractable needs of our society. As Dr. King reminds us, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. I am honored to welcome Professor Hamilton as our speaker today. Darrick Hamilton is a university professor, the Henry Cohen Professor of Economics and Urban Policy, and the founding director of the Institute of Race, Power, and Political Economy at the New School. Considered one of the nation's foremost scholars, economists, and public intellectuals, Hamilton's accomplishments include recently being profiled in the New York Times, Mother Jones Magazine, the Wall Street Journal, and being featured in Politico Magazine's 2017 50 Ideas Shaping American Politics and the People Behind Them issue. Also, he is a member of the Marguerite Casey Foundation in partnership with the Group Health Foundation's inaugural class of Freedom Scholars. Hamilton has been involved in crafting policy proposals such as baby bonds and a federal job guarantee, which have garnered a great deal of media attention and served as inspiration for legislative proposals at the federal, state, and local levels. He has served as a member of the Economic Committee of the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force, and he has testified before several Senate and House committees, including the Joint Economic Committee on the nation's potential policy responses to the COVID-19 pandemic-induced health and economic crises. He was a surrogate and advisor for the Bernie Sanders presidential campaign, and he has advised numerous other leading members of Congress, as well as various 2020 presidential candidates. Most recently, Dr. Hamilton was appointed as chief economist for the AFL-CIO, the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations. Dr. Hamilton received his PhD in economics from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and his bachelor's degree also in economics from Oberlin College. Professor Hamilton will speak, and then we will have some time for Q&A. Please see the mics in the middle of the aisles there. Think about your questions that you could ask him to stump him after. I'm pleased right now to welcome a dear friend, a dear, dear friend from way back in grad school. Please join me in welcoming the 2025 Martin Luther King Jr. Black History Month speaker, my friend, Dr. Darrick Hamilton.
So after that introduction, I got to take a deep breath. Sitting in the audience, this is the first time my team has used that picture, and it's a big smiley picture. And levity is good, but this is going to be a solemn topic. Thanks to you all, thanks to Provost Ward, thanks to my dear friend, Vice President Diane Forbes-Berthon, and then also in the audience, another great friend that was with us through graduate school years, Diane Marie St. George, who's a professor here. And one of the connective tissues to the three of us was a woman who's not with us, and I'll get choked up over it because she exemplifies the legacy, the values, the spirit of not standing for injustice on individual and structural levels. Her name is Nicola Martin, and we had the great fortune of spending time with her and knowing her, and without a doubt, the accomplishments we have today are at least in part of her values and systems that she imparted upon us. So the inauguration of Donald Trump's second term, coinciding with Martin Luther King Day, is not just a coincidence. It's a sad irony from which we can pivot and compare and contrast two very distinct visions of America, and it demands our attention. Trump's continued electoral success lays bare our nation's vulnerability, our fears, and our divisions. As Trump promises to, quote, make America great again, a return to a, quote, better time, for those who embraced his campaign, we must reckon with the reality that his sustained popularity is a symptom, not a cause. It's a symptom of a bipartisan economy that's failed to promote economic security and prosperity for most Americans. The trending deterioration of our economic and social integrity is exactly what Dr. King fought hard to warn us about all those years ago. President Trump's playbook leveraged a tried and tested tool, a political and economic appeal to relative status. Thanks to the work of classical sociologists Herbert Blummer and critical race theorists like Cheryl Harris, we understand that relative status, oftentimes both legally and socially enforced by the state, provides individuals with a sense of psychological solace and economic relative advantage vis-a-vis individuals from some other subaltern group. Its power is grounded in vulnerability. The greater the social despair, the greater the insecurity, the greater absolute inequality, the greater the political, economic, and psychological appeal to the base in us one's relative status. The strategy has deep roots tracing back to Barry Goldwater's Southern strategy, where appeals to whiteness were made in a context of the racial gains that King had achieved following the civil rights movement. Barry Goldwater literally said a return to a simpler time was where we should be thinking about going. Trump has refined and evolved and amplified these appeals, offering a sense of restored status in exchange for a political allegiance. It's noteworthy that these appeals to relative status, they're structural and not limited to our racial identity. Right? I want to make that point, that it's not only about race. These are structural things that one applies and tries to appeal to. Trump's campaign strategically targeted young men by positioning patriarchy, traditional male roles, as the status that comes along with these roles currently being under threat. Nativity is an obvious layer of identity leveraged by Trump's campaign as he points to division and allure to Black, Latinos, and all people who are not immune to this lure. Trump's anti-immigrant rhetoric and his narrative around migrants supposedly taking Black jobs exploits a nativist anxiety, and it stokes a resentment amongst those perceived to be taking back somebody's rightful status. It is intellectually and tactically a big mistake for us to simply take some of these narratives and thoughts as ignorance, as hate, as failure, as a failure of our public education system, as some sort of cultural wars. That is overly simplistic. A more accurate impetus for Trump's staying power is the result of a larger truth. A truth that when people are economically insecure, they become increasingly vulnerable to the narratives and the promises that honing in on relative status offers to them. Appeals to relative status are effective precisely because they tap into economic grievance, precarity, and loss. If we look at some data over the last 4 decades revealed that 50% of Americans saw negligible increases in their wealth, while the wealth held by the top 1% increased by 500%. This means that half of Americans own less than 2% of our nation's extensive wealth. The vast majorities of Americans have been negatively impacted by real wage stagnation, by a yawning wage productivity gap, by growing wealth inequality, and policies that systematically undervalue work. Over the last 45 years, and again, I want to emphasize this is bipartisan, Democrats and Republicans alike have promoted monetary policies that balance inflation on the backs of precariously employed individuals while facilitating corporate market share consolidation and its accompanying low wages and predatory price gouging. We've been reckoning with both the Reagan and Clinton era regulations and policies like NAFTA, which decimated union power, and perhaps most tragically, we can look at the Bush-Obama public bailout of the financial sector who precipitated the 2008 financial crisis, and it gave way to the oxymoronic term of a jobless recovery, which placed Americans in a prolonged state of economic vulnerability. It is an economy that has systematically deprived people of the necessary economic resources to thrive, and which also has left them vulnerable to the cheap lure of relative identity status distractions. While Trump absorbs our attention with feuds grounded in our differences, both economic and political power continue to consolidate amongst the top, while excluding and mitigating our collective action to address our looming and evident existential crises, such as the climate catastrophes that we face, such as migrant crises and violent global conflict which still plague our planet. An alternative, more enlightened approach, we're not going to just talk about problems today. An alternative, more enlightened approach is an economy and industrial policy that promotes human flourishing, that advances tranquility. That should be a goal of our economy, and authentically enables people to be self-determining in righteous ways. That's a better concept of freedom and choice. This is an economy that centers people in the environments in which we live and systematically invests and directs public resources to them, where people are not simply viewed as consumption agents to whom we distribute resources in a charitable sense to address inequality, but rather one with a conception that when properly resourced, people are innovative, are productive agents that make dynamic contributions that benefit not only themselves, but the economy overall, that promote tranquility, that promote safe and inclusive environments and economies. This means ensuring that people have the economic resources of housing, healthcare, income, jobs, capital, education, all these ingredients we need to thrive. Essentially, what I'm talking about is a 21st century economic version of what great civil rights leaders like A. Philip Randolph and Bayard Rustin described in their Freedom Budget, to which King wrote the foreword for that, as well as Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. The structures of our political economy, we also need to recognize, go well beyond class and individual bigotry. And as a matter of course, race and social identity in general have been weaponized. They've been weaponized to strategically generate hierarchy and propel systems of poverty, stratification, and persistent inequality. The empirical reality is that race-based disparities persist and even widen with higher socioeconomic attainment. So education is not the panacea. It in and of itself is important enough for us to invest in, but we exaggerate its social returns. The empirical reality is vivid when it comes to the racial wealth gap, which has its genesis in a system of slavery when black people were literally capital for white landowning plantation class. So despite secular improvements in racial disparities, because there's been improvements in education and income, when it comes to wealth, the racial wealth gap has largely remained unchanged since we've been collecting data systematically on it. I recently did a study comparing the racial wealth gap in the United States and South Africa, two very different economies and societies, one where slavery ended centuries ago, one that is just more recently coming out of apartheid decades ago, one where the population is majority black, another where it's not majority black. To a decimal point, the racial wealth gap is essentially the same in both places, where the typical black household will have less than a dime as a typical white household. And what's more, in both societies with higher levels of education, not only did the disparity remain, they increase. It is not uncommon for us to find a black household where the head with a college degree will have less wealth than a white household where the head dropped out of high school. Here in Baltimore, we did some work looking at the racial wealth gap, not only by race, but incarceration status of the individual or a former or a family member. And this perhaps might shock you. It's not a surprise the racial wealth gap is dramatic. It's not a surprise that when it comes to wealth, those that have been formerly incarcerated or returning citizens have much less wealth than those that haven't. But if we look at the intersections, the combination of being black and not having experience in the carceral system is associated with less wealth than white and having experience with the carceral system. So again, playing hard, studying hard, working hard, playing by the rules does not address these socially established structures that persist. The limited explanatory power of education and hence human capital and the extent of the racialized nature of Americans' political economy goes beyond wealth. The unemployment rate for black people is typically twice that of white workers, irrespective of age and education. And in terms of earning, black workers are paid less than their white counterparts, irrespective of social and economic circumstance. And if we look in a dynamic way across business cycles, racial disparities widen and widen more for those at higher levels of education, further emphasizing the role of social identity hierarchy in establishing distribution of socially desired outcomes and how that sorting becomes even more magnified in the thongs of recession. So let me say that plainly. In a recession, the racial disparities in economic outcomes widen, but they widen for more for those with higher levels of education. One might think that education can shield you, but when the stakes become high and scarcity becomes more intense, we start using race even more as a sorter of who gets access to what and what not. So the emergent framing of the discipline that I'm a part of, economics, it purporting itself as a science, well, that's a big part of our conceptual problem. What it does is it presents an innuendo of a purity devoid of politics, devoid of the use of power, and devoid of the tribalism that has been consistent in affecting humankind since throughout our history. The economic concept of freedom and fairness grounded in individual price takers at baseline, it doesn't adequately take into account the roles of capital, the roles of power, and the uneven distribution of power and capital in our society. This notion of markets, they themselves are political and social constructions. And the constructions of these are influenced by uneven distributions of power and capital in the first place. If you want to start a farmer's market, you got to go get a permit. This is all especially true in understanding and explaining identity group disparity. If we think about poor people, we don't empower them, we manage them. We manage them as a surplus population. Not income mobility, but income maintenance. We socially isolate them, we conscript them to our military, we incarcerate them en masse, and more, we're implementing policies aimed at controlling their reproduction, their fertility, and their family formation. They're characterized as persistently unemployed and unemployable, a source of urban crime and malice, and whose subsistence need we deem as drains on our fiscal budget. This fuels the rationality for austerity. If behavioral modification, particularly with regards to investments in human capital, if that's the central issue, why fund government agencies and programs which at best misallocate resources to irresponsible individuals, or worse, create dependencies to further fuel irresponsible behaviors? It feeds into a proverbial American narrative that through hard work and effort, individuals could turn their proverbial rags to riches. Individual anecdotes, we provide those as evidence of this being true, the power and effect of free market efficacy. But what we don't provide is the systematic evidence of the countless cases of hardworking individuals who are not able to attain social mobility, and likewise the anecdotes of those individuals that are already born into wealth and privilege, who are able to maintain that privilege regardless of whatever effort they extend. The politics and the economic effect of this American ethos is what it does is it absolves the state of the conditions and remedies for these disparities and Black economic underdevelopment. And instead, it puts the locus of control on individuals and Black people themselves. The underlying politics of this self-help efficacy, especially if public resources are being deployed, is that it either deliberately explains away racial stratification or unconsciously overlooks the role of race and racism in determining our material outcomes. In this formation, any attempt by the state to exert stimulus or some regulatory influence on economic relationships is considered an interference, a distortion, a deviation from a natural order. That is to say, the state cannot deliver what heroic individuals can themselves accomplish if they were left to their own devices. If Black people would only engage in more productive behaviors and habits, we would be able to capture a greater share of America's vast wealth. Nothing could be further from the truth. From the beginning of our American project, our government has proactively shaped our economy, determining who reaps the benefits of our capital flows and our economic prosperity. For example, while in the 19th century we had import tariffs and infrastructure investments that nurtured our fledgling domestic industrial base, we also had fugitive slave laws enshrined racial structures of defining work and ownership. Concurrently in that period, the U.S. government's genocidal displacement of indigenous peoples from their homelands, it made way for the Homestead Act, which transferred those lands to a white family middle class without charge. So the proactive role of our government has played in determining our winners and losers, especially by race, should be undeniable. There's no amount of individual economic effort that can overturn century-long programs of resource hoarding amongst the wealthy and the powerful few, supported by a political economy that offers the dominant political group, which in the American case has been predominantly white, with some Black exceptions, relative status anchored by an otherness in which we define Blackness. There are few examples to reveal the powerful effect of some of these self-help discourses and framings and purported solutions to our problems than the notion of, and this is going to be controversial, Black buying power. And there's no one who has dispelled this myth with greater clarity, with greater purpose, and overwhelming empirical evidence than Baltimore's own Professor Jared Ball, who's at Morgan State. And he did this in his seminal text, The Myth and Propaganda of Black Buying Power. The inconvenient truth of this popular self-help notion of the efficacy of Black buying power is that it's limited to selling advertisements in Black-owned and Black-targeted media outlet. Beyond that, the value of Black buying power, especially when inflicted with a general mandate to buy Black, it's largely aesthetic. But I don't want to minimize the aesthetics. I buy black. Indeed, I'm drawn to it. Moreover, the feelings of affinity, of socioeconomic solidarity, it may deliver some psychological and cultural benefits. However, we should not be naive to the limitations of consumption preferences in the context of a reality of inadequate economic assets, power, and ownership of the means of production, when an actual strategy to improve the material conditions of Black Americans is going to require those inputs. But all is not lost. If not in collective buying power, where actual remedy and efficacy resides, the good news is that we can do something with collective agency. Our agency lies not in a mythic notion of buying power, but political power. Ultimately, our economy is a choice. We get to define and determine value. Exacting a claim on our economy requires movement building and organization that can exert and demand the conditions that truly empower not just Black people, all people with the necessary resources they need to be self-determining and have economic agency. The purpose of our economy should be to promote our productive capacities. It should be to advance tranquility, and it should be to promote human flourishing and enable people to be self-determining in righteous ways. And the role of government should be to set the rules and steward public resources in order to achieve that purpose. Although not complete and perfect, we have a blueprint. Over 75 years ago, the international coalition led by Eleanor Roosevelt, convened by the United Nations, issued a landmark Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The declaration, coming out of a political context of the atrocities of the Second World War and the economic destabilization that preceded it, was meant to promote human flourishing and tranquility at a time when despair within and among nation states was pretty ubiquitous. The Declaration identified 5 categories of human rights: civil rights, political rights, social rights, cultural rights, and economic rights. In isolation, any subset of those human rights, they're inadequate. In fact, I would argue that not only are they inadequate, they are co-optations of our notions of freedom and rights. Over time, the category that has lost the most momentum and saliency, economic rights. Realized or not, civil and political aspects of human rights are well ingrained in our public psyche. However, least important has to be economic rights. This is essentially what became increasingly clear to Dr. King in his final days. By the late 1960s, towards the twilight of his life, King had become explicit about the essential connections between economic rights, freedom, and racial justice. His quote, "I'm now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be the most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly in a now and widely discussed measure, guaranteed income." King's calls for a federal job guarantee, guaranteed income, and even reparations reflected his belief that, broadly speaking, poverty was a moral failing of our nation, and for people to truly be free, that required resources. His Poor People's Campaign sought to build solidarity across racial lines, uniting poor people in the pursuit of economic security and prosperity. And his explicit call for reparations for Black people was also indicative of his views that economic rights and economic justice could not be reduced to classism. Tragically, and perhaps not coincidentally, King's life was cut short in 1968 before the phase of this vision, with an emphasis on economic rights, could fully be realized, leaving a profound legacy of unfinished work that we need to accomplish. Starting in the 1970s, with the neoliberal revolution and the narrowing of our understanding of human rights to only political and civil rights, and rights pertaining to the protection of property. industrial policy began to focus on firms and a zero-sum, winner-take-all, nation-state competition in the international sphere. Although we might not usually conceive of them as such, policies like deregulation, the government outsourcing and privatization, corporate tax cuts, and outright corporate subsidies, all things that the US government has continually engaged in since at least the 1980s, amount to a strategic direction of resources that impact economic activity and outcomes and are hence industrial policy. So don't believe them when they talk about laissez-faire and say that's not industrial policy. That is industrial policy. Not one that I agree with, but it's industrial policy. And indeed, an argument could be made that despite the rhetoric of small government, the Reagan administration, with its deregulation, with its union-busting activities, and corporate tax cuts, represented a massive and active strategic shift in government resources, both political and economic resources, towards corporate interests and away from labor and industrial and economic purposes that I would have in mind. This type of industrial policy is antithetical to shared human flourishing and has left us vulnerable to an economic context of fear, of despair, of growing inequality, both within and across nation states, the very situation for which the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and Dr. King sought to address in the first place. The rhetorical allusion and elegance around words like freedom, choice, and a specific notion of rights, not the economic rights of people, but the economic rights of property, is a rhetoric devoid of an honest reckoning of the immoral practices by which that property came to be distributed in the first place. Without resources and largely without resources, individuals are largely restricted from benefiting from economic markets and instead are at the whim of some charitable donation or vulnerable to the exploitation of somebody who has resources. Investing in human capacities, a la the Nobel laureate Amartya Sen's conception of human capabilities, not only should be the primary purpose of government in the first instance, but also turns to a generative positive externality and a productive macroeconomic multiplier that will benefit us all. I know I'm talking a lot. Let me try to wind down. Ultimately, pessimism, cynicism, and inaction will not reverse our trends of economic consolidation, of divisive politics, and the inability to adequately address our collective existential looming crises of things like climate change. King famously wrote in a Birmingham jail cell that, quote, "I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block is not the White Citizens Council or the Ku Klux Klanners, but the white moderate, who's more devoted to order than to justice." Exerting claim on our economy is going to require building movements and organizations that can extract and exact demands and conditions that truly empower people with all the resources that they're going to need to be authentically self-determining. Dr. King and his civil rights partners had the economic foresight to know that in order to fight against the conditions that facilitated Donald Trump's strongman breed of divisive politics, we must defang that what gives it its power. And that is an economy grounded in despair, risk, insecurity, and a growing chasm between the haves and the have-nots. Now it's always the time to build on the lessons of Dr. King and shift our prevailing paradigm towards a more inclusive and prosperous future with the strategic direction of our public resources towards people and a sustainable environment in both an industrial and economic sense. Essentially, what we need is a 21st century version of Dr. King's economic vision that stemmed from his civil rights work from when he was at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference beginning in the 1950s into the twilight of his life, his Poor People's Campaign in 1968, and that Poor People's Campaign for Economic Justice and Inclusive Economic Rights writ large for us all. In the end, the optimistic message is that the power lies within us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Thank you so much. If you feel like you were challenged, enlightened, inspired, flummoxed, please come to the mic and share any comments or questions. We'd love to hear from a few of your reflections or questions you have about how we move forward and how we build human capacities and create an inclusive economy for all. Thank you, Dr. Hamilton. Questions from you or thoughts and reflections on Dr. Hamilton's talk? We have mics in the center here, or if you are online, we can, I don't know if we have questions over the mic. Dr. Wong, Dean of the School of Graduate Studies, is coming forward.
My feeble mind, I'm going to need this iPad to jot down notes.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed what you had to say. As you were wrapping up, I said, well, don't stop. I can listen to you all day. I wanted to ask about, you mentioned climate change as one of the pressures of our time. What ideas do you see emerging in the field of regenerative economics? And again, looking at the economic system differently as opposed to growth forever versus sustainable growth for human flourishing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a spot-on question. And again, it goes back to our values. Right now, the defining feature of how we determine whether an economy is functioning well or not is what you just mentioned, economic growth. And what economic growth doesn't do, doesn't talk about distribution. It doesn't talk about attributes like tranquility, like peace, which are all features that if I were defining an economy, I would try to direct public resources to promote. And it also does not talk about sustainability. In some ways, it's incompatible with sustainability unless other features are added as well. And you named them. So, I'll only add one other point to, in your question, you pretty much made the point, so, and I'm glad you did. And the other feature is we make a mistake if we think about any feature, whether it's climate change, whether it's sustainability, or the threats and promises of AI, if we don't pursue it from a three-pronged lens: the economics of it, the politics of it, and the identity group stratification of the issue. Who we think is deserving and undeserving. All three always are intertwined in determining how things get produced and how they get distributed. So, it's not novel for us to think about race and politics, race and economics, or economics and politics. And I'm picking race in the context of the US. We can go somewhere else and find another stratifying identity. But if we don't understand the interconnections of all three and the ability to coerce a dominant group with relative status in order to consolidate power for those that have power, we won't be able to address these crises.
Hi, I'm Wonder Drake, Senior Associate Dean of Faculty Affairs. So like Dean Wan, I found your speech a little bit over my head, but it was really helpful. So the question I have for you, and I've been thinking about this since I got here, this is what drew me here. I'm a medical doctor. The very first patient that I enrolled in my clinical trial, she was gifted, but she had not graduated from high school. And I remember asking her, because she went through the questionnaire so fast, I said, "Are you gifted?" And she said, "What does that mean?" And I said, was high school easy for you? Did you make A's without studying? She said, oh, yeah, I totally did. The question I have, because I don't believe intelligence is defined to a group. I think these tests are biased in how people think, and people think a certain way, so they're going to score for it. It has nothing to do with their work ethic, nothing to do with their emotional intelligence, everything to do with, do you understand what they're asking? And I think I'm wondering what we as an institution can do. You know, one of the things I love about Baltimore is they have all these empty houses, but then we also have a very large homeless community. So, like, part of me thinks, why don't we just buy a bunch of houses? Buy a bunch of them, fix them up, and help the poor have housing, because owning a home is a great entryway into building wealth. So I think I'm just trying to, maybe you could kind of give us an idea as an institution. I mean, you get a house for $1 in Baltimore. That's amazing to me. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Oh, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I hope I do justice in response.
Yeah.
So let me lead with, there is no silver bullet policy. You can have really effective policies, but what you also need along with policies is narrative. And you also need a North Star. So you need a conception of justice. Right now, the dominant conception of justice and narrative is kind of what I was trying to say, which is through individual effort, dent, capabilities, that's the defining feature of what's just, and it also contributes to a productive, efficient economy that benefits us all. That's a point of view. One can look at some empirical evidence, which I pointed out, to say that it doesn't seem to have bared out. But what's valuable is at least there's a concept, there's a notion of freedom and justice grounded in that view. So I'm trying to present another notion, another North Star vision for what an economy should be trending towards. And that is this notion of human rights that includes economic rights, that says that access to a house, an apartment, access to a quality education, that these things aren't just outcomes for our consumption, they are investments, that they are enablers, that they generate the capabilities so that we can have fairness and then also have a thriving economy that not only of innovation, spillover effects of neighborhood solidarity, in which case we might be more willing to partake in a political system that can benefit us all. So I think we need the vision. Then we also need great policies that you described. Home ownership is not going to be the panacea, but it will make a huge dent. If you couple home ownership with debt-free college education, quality college education, debt-free quality education from grade school all the way through college, now you're getting even better. So you keep going. So let me also say a couple other things. So the point, another point that you raised, I just want to make this clear, even in university spaces and everywhere. I'm not anti-science. I believe in evidence and methods, but we need to recognize that every idea, every methodology, whether it's medicine, chemistry, et cetera, begins with a set of norms. And that's just a matter of fact, not a critique. Matter of fact, that's the value of diversity. We see diversity, equity, and inclusion is under attack these days. If you want fresh ideas, if you want innovation, if you still keep going to the same ideas and perspectives from which we begin, you just replicate society. So one, it's the right thing to do. We don't want the aesthetics to look segregated in some way. That displeases me. That my sense of what is right is disturbed by that. You get to choose yourself. But in a productive sense, you stifle innovation, you stifle fresh ideas if you don't allow for access to assets that otherwise wouldn't be included.
Final question.
I talk too much.
Yeah, hello. My name is Nicky Mutinda. I'm staff here in the computer department. So my question is about Robert Moses, because I saw you are from New York. So is an autobiography by Robert Caro. He mentions how he destroys communities by building expressways, putting precedents over highways over communities, and just destroying neighborhoods like South Bronx and all that areas. So what I'm wondering is, has New York ever recovered from those policies? And the second question is, what has other cities learned from this experience in terms of urban planning? Do you see any like lessons learned, and what other mayors have done to overcome what Robert Moses did?
Yeah, I mean, it also speaks to the previous question about what universities can do. The lessons from Robert Moses, one of the lessons for me is, if we're analyzing any contemporary phenomena without notions of history, we're going to get it wrong. If you don't know the stories of Robert Moses, his interventions, and we try to understand inequities today, you're going to get it wrong. So you got to combine aesthetics, humanist studies, history, art, literature, all of these things with our analytical work, contemporary analytical work that might come out of economics, sociology, et cetera. Otherwise, you will get it wrong. It'll be myopic. And then the more direct answer, no, New York has not fully recovered from the highway construction, the divided neighborhoods that we see. Robert Moses might have been the most effective at it, but clearly it was done throughout America. We could find these examples. And this is the point. Our government has always had a proactive role in determining winners and losers. And there's good news and silver linings in that. We can do things differently. Our government can generate middle classes that otherwise wouldn't exist by their investments if done the right way. So I think that's a good lesson for us to learn from that. Again, no, I think that's a great point, bringing up Robert Moses, and the answer is you heard it. So.
Dr. Hamilton, everyone, thank you so much for your time. You can Google Darrick, follow him online. He can come talk to your class or your folks, or you can go up to the new school and visit much. Okay, so we're going to move on in the program now. I'm really pleased at this time, after hearing such an inspiring and encouraging and challenging talk, to hear from someone else who's a friend of our campus and who's been here before, Lady Breon, who is the executive director of the Black Arts District, an organization she founded in 2019. And in 2024, Lady Breon was appointed by Governor Wes Moore as the Poet Laureate of Maryland. Did you know that? So that's really awesome, making her the youngest Poet Laureate in Maryland's history and the only spoken word artist to hold this position. We're really pleased to welcome her back to UMB. Here is Lady Breon.
Good afternoon. Happy Black History Month. All right, so I have two poems for you all, and I'm going to take my seat. How many of you all are fans of spoken word? Oh, okay, in good company then. All right. Usually I have to, prime the audience that you don't have to be quiet while the performance is happening, but I feel like y'all know what that means. So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, we're going to practice together, okay? I'm going to provide you some tools, and I invite you to try them on. So when the poem is happening, if you hear something that you like, that is thought-provoking, that made you feel something in your spirit, okay, there are some things that you can do to show that exuberance, all right? If you like a line in the poem, I see somebody doing it already. Show everybody, model for everybody. Exactly, you can snap. You can snap, okay? If you like a line a little more than that, think about your grandmother's favorite dish, and you can be like, try it. You can even combine those together and say, okay? You can say, ooh, try it. All right, listen, the point is, whatever your exuberance looks like, I implore you to show it while the poem is happening. Is that cool? All right, so this first poem that I have, given that this program is also in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, this is a poem that I wrote about him, and yeah, that is how we're gonna start, yeah? All right, here we go. They have tried to turn our hero into a hallmark. Because one way to kill a man's character is to let his enemy create the spin. The type that will make equality look like segregation all over again. Packaged affirmative action revolt. Then served on prejudice platter, screaming all lives matter and ain't nothing sadder than having your king's crown corrupted. He dreamt of integrating, now we got an overt racist as the leader of the nation. We facing police brutality at alarming rates and protesters protracting the slain's memories, billy clubs in backs and fatigued extremities. The only thing missing are German shepherds and a water hole showering to be a replica of a march from the 60s. The best way to honor King is by progressing, but we continue to accept the status quo as if that mountaintop is too far-fetching. Make a Negro a saint, and the people will believe he became something they can't. Because museums, they don't better material conditions. Washington monuments don't actualize the vision. They put his name on a few schools, but don't educate the children with organizing tools or civic engagement models. Give him a street sign in the hood, eyes on the prize, but we still ain't found our way about that project high rise. Don't idolize the man if you don't live by the message. They've chewed him down to pieces so the masses can digest him. Made him anti-Malcolm X, non-violent and accepting. No poor people in Detroit, no Vietnam critiquing, no jailhouse letters, no shaming of capitalism and oppressing. Said he felt like he was moving us into a burning building, but we can't see King in the eyes of Baltimore riots when that CVS was flaming. He's been painted docile, hostile views made quiet, no more than a sugar-free cookie perfect for the white media's diet. He was one of the many in the movement for the masses, now plastered permanently in our minds, but are we following his legacy or aligning with their lies? Thank you. Thank you. So I feel like, you know, our keynote speaker, he kind of set the stage. He said it's going to be solemn. And I said, okay, well, those are the poems then. Second poem, the second poem, I was a little torn. I was thinking about, given that this is a school of medicine, and I remember learning about the story of Henrietta Lacks. So I thought, you know, maybe I'd do that poem. And I also have this poem called Two Baltimores that talks about the different realities that you might experience depending on your zip code in this city. And so, they only said I had 10 minutes, okay? I'm trying to stay within the time frame. All right. Well, they said it's okay. Okay, well, can I have this water if I'm gonna do this? Okay, all right. All right, well, then that's the roadmap, okay? So first we'll do this poem called Miss Lacks. And again, you know, I just remember learning about her story and the, you know, really concerning history around the medical industry, Johns Hopkins Hospital, you know, what some people call medical apartheid, et cetera. And so this poem is dedicated to that. And I think when we think about Black History Month, there's a lot to celebrate, but there's also a lot to critique, right? And so this is a part of that critique. Here we go. This is a letter to a woman who walked into ER as patient but was turned science experiment, and after her death, her cells lived on forever, proof that Black girls really are magic. Dear Miss Henrietta Lacks, I hear hospitals round here used to disappear poor people and reverse engineer their beings, secretly gentrifying your cells from your body, like you too good for your bones, same as they drop Black boys into cells from their homes, calling on your molecular structure for answers like a cellular phone, cause you regenerate going on and on like a Duracell clone, dissecting sections of your skeleton, turning your segments into specimen, holding your death under a microscope. And now my people don't walk into hospitals because we know we look like an experiment. No, this heartbeat sounds like hypothesis. Corporations are carnivores and we ain't trying to be prey. Only God be our healer, so we make medicine between two hands when we pray. We remedy, we outback garden herb and seed. We get rest and drink herbal tea because we know the history. Know that plantations fed the hungry mouths of medical wards, starving for sick Negroes, devouring organs and intestines, navigating through gastro tracts like Mac Queston Hurd. The stories of night doctors, white-robed grim reapers called grave robbers, collecting colored clinical materials for tester trials to treat the privileged from the parish. They published the findings of the nameless. So medical journals are literally an obituary for the faceless, the stories. The stories of our grandmothers line our genetics, teaching us not to trust these doctors and their anesthetics. So we opt out of procedures, guess it's bio, logic. The birth certificate is already a bill of sale, but we're not for profit, Miss Lax. I wonder, if they never found a cure in your DNA, would we even know your name? If your blood did not become elixir, no extractions without your permission, would you even be mentioned? Or just one of the thousands of black souls getting their caps sold, or black skin getting capsuled into capsules of modern day medicine, just one of the thousands whose screams dangle from the scalpels, an insignificant instrument for their medical instruments to play on. But these days your immortal cells are legend, so I guess the world will never know. Wow. Okay. Thank you. This is the authorized, unauthorized third poem, and then better take my seat. The last time that I came and did a performance for a different installment of this very event, I was scolded because I did not bring any copies of my book. So I want to let you know that in my backpack over there, I do have some copies of my book. And if anybody is interested in taking one home with you, they're $15, shameless plug. All right, last poem. Here we go. This one is called Fraternal Twins. Baltimore is like a set of fraternal twins, conceived as one, but birthed into two, separated by a difference in characteristics. Don't believe me? Well, check the census, because half these neighborhoods been black and poor since Nixon was president, and it's crazy. In '68, they put a bullet through a king's dream, and in the streets were riots. 2015, a gray man is made a memory, and again, riots, because America is still on a predominantly dark meat diet in this city. There are multi-climate conditions. Concrete jungle food deserts, fire hydrants are misting, but resources run low. But behold, an oasis of plush green trees and rolling parks exist in the land of condos. Just look at the windows if you want to see pain. The rich, no curtains, because they would never cover. The poor use brown plywood as a cover, and you can hear the cricket-filled silence or police sirens bouncing off the walls of project housing. Mansions in Guilford, but vacants in Gilmore. Manicured lawns or weeds growing between the cracks of callous sidewalks when it's 2 a.m. On one side of town, there is a safe white woman jogging, a taut leash around the neck of her miniature schnauzer, Sophie. But on the other side of town, there are blue lights, cop lights, floodlights, cell phone lights in the hand of a young brother on the corner trapping, while the low light of hope is ever dimming. And John Hopkins Medical Campus is forever sprouting, touting revitalization, smiling through crest white teeth, while the aching teeth of the poor can feel gentrification in their dilapidated communities, decaying like cavities. But coffee cafes foreshadow a root canal. For pennies, they'll uproot a mother, father, and child, then put colorful paint over a graveyard view. Just ask Greenmount what a station north will do. Lead particles in the H2O or outdoor water fountains always afloat. bike lanes, or crater moon-sized potholes. Fiends penguin wobble to a street side lean, or prescription addicts with paychecks that keep habits fully functioning. There are some communities with flower shops, but others have teddy bear memorials commemorating homies that got popped. Tennis shoes on light poles to uplift fallen souls. You still can't see the distinction between two twins cocooned in the womb of the belly of the beast. It's easy as counting 1, 2, 3. Just count the corner stores, liquor stores, and churches versus dog parks, guarded fences, and organic markets. The tale of two Baltimores is not a secret. There are just some who are too privileged to ever see it. Thank y'all so much. I'm Lady Breon.
Lady Breon. Lady Breon. Young people would say hashtag no lies told. That was some uncomfortable truths. Thank you for your talent and your expertise. Thank you so much. Now we transition to the Diversity Awards. So I asked Dr. Ward to come up to help us present these awards. So I'll let us know what they are. The University of Maryland, Baltimore, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Diversity Recognition Awards are presented to individuals and or group achievements in the area of equity, diversity, and inclusion. My office, the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, asks UMB schools and units to nominate individuals or groups that have played a leadership role or been integral in these efforts at the university. Recipients serve as models of the ideals of the life and work of Dr. King. Provost Ward will hand out the awards. Please come forward when you hear your names. Stay on the stage, and when you're called, we'll have photo, and then we'll move on to the next group. The first award is Outstanding UMB Student Initiative for Maximizing Student Development, IMSD. Please come forward. Student award. The International Institutes of Health Supported Training Program supports the success of biomedical PhD graduate students from historically underrepresented backgrounds at the School of Medicine and the School of Pharmacy. For 2 decades, the program's graduate fellows have established a close-knit network of support, excelled in their academic training, served UMB in numerous capacities, and engaged in outreach to the broader Baltimore community through IMSD-sponsored events. These students also excel in cutting-edge research in 2 schools' graduate research programs and work to improve the training environment for all UMB students through committee service, recruitment efforts, and interprofessional development activities. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Now to the Outstanding UMB Faculty Award. And it's awarded to the Embrace Initiative to be received by Dr. Kyla Liggett-Creel. Please come forward. Operating with the belief that everybody can be great because everyone can serve, Embrace strives to dismantle systems of oppression and create a world that is just, equitable, and safe for all. Executive Director Kyla Liggett-Creel leads the program, which works to help release youth from detention centers and support formerly incarcerated individuals in assisting others transitioning back into society. Embrace partners with government agencies to deliver equity-based care for system-involved families with case managers who have personal experience in these systems. Youth and returning citizens, those who have experiences such as homelessness and incarceration, serve as mentors, counselors, and leaders with this initiative. Congratulations to Dr. K and team, and we invite any members, I see they're already standing, of the Embrace team and community to stand as well to be acknowledged. Congratulations. Great work happening at UMB with our community. Thank you so much, Embrace. Now the UMB Staff Award. I am pleased to recognize the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in the School of Social Work. Guided by a commitment to the core values of social work, ODEI leads the School of Social Work's efforts to foster inclusion, justice, and equity. The office has launched numerous programs and events over the years, such as their first annual statewide JEDI Summit, Justice, Equity, Inclusion, Diversity and Inclusion Summit, and the Dialogue and Engagement Learning Series, which works to foster communication across differences amid increasing tensions related to global conflicts. Their office also strengthened its existing programs and made strides in diversity training for faculty, securing additional funding for its book lending program that makes textbooks more accessible for students, and continuing its affinity groups. Congratulations, colleagues. And now I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Bill Joyner, who is going to introduce our Community Champion Awards. And Bill is the Assistant Vice President for Community Engagement, and he'll now present the Community Champion of Equity and Justice Awards. Bill?
Thank you, Dr. Forbes-Berthoud, Dr. Ward. Good afternoon, everyone. And congratulations again to this year's MLK Recognition Award winners. We now move to honor our neighbors who are exemplifying our core values of equity and justice in the neighborhoods surrounding our campus here in Baltimore. Now more than ever, it is vital to recognize that building, maintaining, and defending an equitable and just society is a responsibility for all of us, inside and outside of our institutions. Our first champion of equity and justice has been building a space that is inclusive for our young people who have fun, build skills, and embrace being their full and authentic selves. In this brief video, we will learn more about Mr. Kevin Ricks.
The University of Maryland, Baltimore presents Kevin Ricks with the Community Champions of Equity and Justice Award for his positive impact on children in the Baltimore area.
Family and community, that's what I believe Lily Kids is.
Bearing his mother's nickname, Ricks started Lily Kids just a few years ago as a flag football league, but has since grown into a powerhouse of sports mentorship, promoting mental wellness and scholastic achievement to boys and girls around Baltimore.
You can't have no unexcused absences. You have to have a certain grade level to even play in our league. So, when you have 400 kids last season that played, that's 400 awesome grades, 400 awesome attendance. You can't just be out there, doing anything to come into our league. You have to be a great, what we call a student athlete. Student is first, so you can be the athlete. So, that's what we pride ourselves on.
Last year, Lily Kids established Maryland's first girls' middle school flag football league, a goal Kevin has had since the organization's inception.
One of my main goals when I started my program was to get a girls' flag going. And ever since then, I was like, that was my ambition, to get them into a space where they're able to play, be themselves, and do everything they need to do.
When the final whistle blows and the game is over, Kevin is just beginning. He routinely finds innovative ways to make sure the children of Baltimore City are filled with confidence year-round, including free haircuts during homecoming.
The haircuts, the toy drives, the turkey drives, the back-to-school drives, book bags, everything. So I wanted to always make sure that I'm giving back.
Kevin recognizes that not everyone wants to or can play football, but that's not stopping him from serving his community.
We want to include everyone. So this next season coming up, next school year coming up, late fall, we got golf coming, we have chess coming, we got esports, we got soccer, we got volleyball, we got basketball, we have everything that whatever you want to do, we got you. We have music coming. So, we have all these programs that we're bringing. We want everyone that when you hear about us, we do that. So, that's what we got coming this next season.
While Lily Kids may seem like a lot for one man to handle, Kevin takes his own advice.
You don't have to do everything. You just gotta do your part. That's literally it. You don't have to affect a million kids. As long as you're able to affect one kid, you did your job in life. Pass it forward. That's pretty much it.
Congratulations to Kevin Ricks for receiving this year's Community Champions of Equity and Justice Award.
Please welcome to the stage Mr. Kevin Ricks. Our next champion of equity and justice has been coaching organizations and institutions on how to advance racial justice for more than 2 decades. Our next video highlights Baltimore Racial Justice Action.
The University of Maryland, Baltimore presents BRJA with the Community Champions of Equity. The University of Maryland, Baltimore presents BRJA with the Community Champions of Equity and Justice Award for their positive impact in West Baltimore.
BRJA was founded officially in 2003. We started out strictly as a learning community, trying to think about how can we make a difference in this country where racism and white supremacy are embedded in everything we do.
Dottie Burt Markowitz is one of the founders of Baltimore Racial Justice Action Organization, and for over 20 years, BRJA has been partnering with organizations and institutions to provide training, consulting, and coaching towards racial justice.
The work is really tailored to what that particular organization or institution says their purpose in going into this partnership with BRJ. What is their purpose? And how can we help do the education and coaching for their work? And a clear understanding that really the work is theirs. We're just there to provide some tools, to hold people accountable, which we will do, and to support their implementing the things they're learning into their policies and procedures.
It's all about talking effectively, Dottie says, and being able to educate people about the history of our country.
I know for sure from the involvement I've had over the years that it's opened people's eyes, especially us white people's eyes, to things we had been so unaware of because we were raised to be unaware of them, especially usually by our families and especially by our educational institutions.
It can be a difficult conversation, but it's the manner in which BRJA conducts their partnership that has led them to success.
It's done with such integrity and such compassion combined with willingness to speak honestly and hold people accountable for what they've committed to doing.
BRJA is considered the local go-to anti-racist organization for anti-racist analysis and commentary on social phenomena. Congratulations to Baltimore Racial Justice Action for receiving this year's Community Champions of Equity and Justice Award.
Congratulations and thank you. And please welcome back Dr. Diane Forbes-Berthoud.
Thank you, Mr. Joyner, and thank you, Dr. Ward. Thank you all for being here. We thank you so much for being a part of our community today. To hear our keynote, Dr. Darrick Hamilton, we thank him again. Micaiah Gestet, Lady Brian, all our award winners, congratulations again. And thank you all to those who made the event happen. To my team, to Katie Hughes, Rhea Roper-Ned, and Rita Gatch, you've done an amazing job to make this go. To OCPA, facilities, events, and to all our wonderful volunteers who are going to guide you to lunch in a moment. Thank you, everyone, and let's keep the dream alive. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.